All right, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Success Sessions. I'm really excited to have not only one of my longest-term friends and acquaintances in the martial arts industry, but just one of the top school owners in our industry, John Bussard. John, thank you so much for being with us today.
I'm glad to be here, Barry.
You know, you got a wealth of information for people. Not that many school owners have achieved what you've done, so the information that you give out to me is going to, when someone like yourself takes the time to share what's going on inside their organization, it's very, very valuable to the brand new school owner, to the seasoned veteran that's been in this industry for years. It's always very, very interesting, and we always get high viewer numbers for these. So tell us, I know who John Bussard is because I've known you. Me and you were on the regional directors board of NAPMA. I don't even know how many years ago that is now.
Right.
And we got to know each other and network back then. But tell us a little bit about John Bussard. So tell us, how long you been training in the martial arts?
Okay, well, before I do that, I gotta tell all your listeners a little bit about Barry because
Okay.
I've known Barry for at least 15 or 20 years.
Right.
And when I first met him, I knew right away after having just a couple of conversations with him, this guy is sharp as a tack. And I knew he was going to do great things in the martial arts industry way back then. I think when I met him, I had 3 schools and he had 3 schools, or we each had 2. I don't remember exactly what it was, but we were both up and coming in the industry. And I've watched him grow and watched him progress. And you guys that are premier clients are so fortunate to be able to pull information from his brain. He's a martial arts genius and a business genius. So,
right, well, check is in the mail. Good job. Check is in the mail.
But I always have a great time talking with Barry. And I always learn a lot myself when I get to speak to him. But to tell you a little bit about me, I started training in 1979. I trained under a legendary Korean martial arts pioneer in Washington, D.C. His name was Ki-Won Kim. I stayed with him until he passed away in 1993.
Oh, wow.
And in 1994, I opened my first school. Didn't really have any intention necessarily of growing it larger than that, but as my first school filled up, I wanted to expand. I wanted to grow, and I opened a second location, and 2 turned to 3, and 3 to 4, and just I opened the first school in 1994. So over the last 23 years, we've just slowly and steadily grown. At one point, we had 13 locations. We actually closed one that was in a small town, so we have 12 locations now. We have a little over 4,000 students in those schools.
Wow.
They're doing well, and we're looking forward to the future.
Now, going back a little bit, you opened your first school in 94. You started training in 79. Same year I started training, actually. You worked for Master Kim?
I did.
What was your positions with him that you actually...
Well, that's a great question. When I worked for my instructor, I loved the man dearly, but the best thing that I can tell you in terms of what he taught me is he taught me how not to run a martial arts school. I worked for him full time. This was in the late 80s, early 90s. I was a college graduate. I made $600 a month gross. I was treated as an independent contractor. I had no benefits whatsoever. And the only reason that I stayed there and continued to work was because I loved it. Now, as it turned out, it was a great apprenticeship because I got a chance to spend a lot of time with him in his later years. He was sort of my Mr. Miyagi. He taught a lot of people. Some people might recognize names like Mitch Barbaro, who owns Atomics. He was Ki-Won Kim's first tournament champion back in the 60s. And, and he taught a lot of great martial artists through the years. And when I was coming up, he was older. He wasn't a young guy. So he was probably 60 years old or so when I met him. And during the time that I was working for him, he was getting up in years. He didn't really have any interest in growing the business. So I was sort of a caretaker. And, I did the best I could. I tried to build the business and tried to, help improve things. But he just really had no interest in it. And unfortunately, for me, from a financial standpoint, that's, I ended up leaving probably about 7 or 8 months, maybe a year before he passed away, because I was in my late 20s and I couldn't do it anymore. So it was a very tough thing to go through. I was still, his student and still grateful for everything he did for me, but I just couldn't afford to work for him any longer. And that was, sort of a tough thing to accept. And it kind of molded me when I opened my school, because I didn't want the people who worked for me, as I started to grow my business, to go through those same types of things that I had to suffer through.
Right, exactly. Very interesting. And I would say a lot of us had that same experience of working for our instructor or master instructor, and like you said, learning all the things we probably should not do. So that was a very profound statement for a lot of people, I think. Right. So you've got 12 locations now, and you're up in the Virginia, D.C.?
Well, we're just outside of D.C. in the Maryland suburbs.
Okay. All right. Great. Now, we can't talk about all 12 locations, and I know from talking, being friends with, Master Von Schmeling down in Florida, when you've got that many locations, you've got your winter schools, just like students. You've got your rock stars, you've got your average student, and you've got ones that you're trying to kick in the butt to get up and get where they need to be going. If you can compartmentalize and average all those together, I don't know if you can possibly do that. But let's pick one average Jean Bussard school, and let's kind of just let the school owners, let's build a little quick model on what your business is like real quick. So for example, number of students. I know for Premier, we have an S1X model, and depending on the square foot, we have a blueprint or a footprint for how many students we're going to max out. So what would be the potential or the max out number or the number for your locations, the average number of students?
For the average school, I'd say it's probably about 325, somewhere in that range.
Now, what's the average square foot of your schools?
You're talking about probably 25 to 2,600 square feet on average for that middle level school. Usually the way we set up our schools, we set them up with 2 training rooms. So we have a lobby and office area, and then we have 2 training mats separated, of course, and bathrooms. And the one thing we've tried to do in recent years, which was one of being around Washington D.C. and obviously rates vary across the country, but what all of our models, or in our model, what we want to do is we want to be in a grocery anchored shopping center. So we don't want to be in a warehouse area, an industrial area. We also don't want to be in a small strip center. We want to be, if it's at all possible, I'd like to be right next to the grocery store. Mm-hmm. So in order to do that, obviously you have to pay a little bit more in rent and be willing to do that. But that's been part of our model. So we try to get into those grocery anchored shopping centers, try to find space where we're going to get as much walk-by traffic as we are, from the other marketing and advertising that we do because of our location. So that's sort of central to the strategy. The size of the school is usually dictated by that. And what I realize is if we're going to pay more per square foot, we really got to maximize every square foot. So years ago, I might have had a school that was 3,200 square feet and it had a storage room in the back, and it had a big open lobby. And after a while, I realized I was paying for all this space, and we weren't using it to make any money. So we've gotten to the point where now everything is set up so that even at the trial or in the introductory lesson, we tell the students, we pre-frame them, come dressed for class. We don't want a big locker room in the back where, things can happen that we don't really want to happen. So we've gotten rid of locker rooms. We've tried to minimize, any wasted space whatsoever. So if we have, a 2,400 or 2,500 square foot facility, we may have 2 800 or 900 square foot mat areas. And the other thing that we try to do is we want to have two classes going on at the exact same time. So, between 4 and 8 p.m., we might have a 3 and 4 year age group in one room, and we might have a 8 to 12-year-old age group in the other classroom, both doing different things but being there at the same time. And in essence, what that allows us to do is offer twice as many classes in the same amount of time.
And from 4 to 8, both floors are usually active, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
People ask me all the time. They'll be like, should I have one classroom floor or two? And most martial arts schools that I visit, the second floor sits there empty maybe a couple times a night. So in that instance, it doesn't make sense. But for your model and where you're at and the ability to pack it full, that's great.
Yeah, and that is, something, again, if you're talking about the middle of the road school, that's where we are. Now, for a newer school, if we opened a school and it had 2 rooms, yeah, you would have one, if the school's only been open 8 or 9 months, they're not going to be utilizing, the full mat in both rooms. But eventually, once that school matures, that's the goal, is to have a mature school that is utilizing both areas, no wasted space whatsoever, and then we can, generate the max revenue from that.
Right. Now, what kind of curriculum or style are you guys instructing at your studios?
It's blended. The basic style is Tang Soo Do or Taekwondo, which is what my instructor taught. But through the years, just like everyone else, we blended in different styles of martial arts to, just to make it a little more well-rounded.
Are you teaching any sub-programs like a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or a fitness kickboxing and that type of thing at your schools?
We do that at some of our locations. It really depends on the instructor's, 2 things. First is the instructor's skill set in that area. And the second thing is, what we have space for. One of the things that has happened with us is, for example, we were teaching fitness kickboxing at one of our locations. Our karate program grew to the point where, we had to give something up. And what we gave up was the fitness kickboxing. So when we open a new locations, a lot of times we'll put in additional programs to fill the space. But as our martial arts program fills up, which is really what we want our, and our martial arts program is primarily kids. It's primarily age 3 or 4 to about 12 is our market.
Sure.
So that's what we want to fill up, the entire, space as much as we can.
Okay. Right. So I'm going to go down through this list of building this model on your business. We were talking about number of students. Average John Bussard School is going to have 325 students. Do you mind me asking, of that, what might be an average tuition billing check if you, or accounts receivables if you're doing your own billing a month?
Yeah, it's probably for the middle of the road school, we're doing about $50,000 a month in that location.
Now that's just your 8 accounts receivables, right?
Correct.
Now, what might be a in-house cash or type money there at one of those?
Very, very little for the way that we run our model. One of the things that that I looked at many years ago as I started expanding into multiple schools is how am I going to control the cash? And so one way of doing that early on was everybody was on an enrollment agreement. Everybody was paying their tuition monthly. And in Maryland, you have to be bonded if you're going to cash students out. We looked into it and decided that rather than going down that route, we wanted to go in a little bit of a different direction. So the way that we do our enrollments is when a person initially enrolls in our program, they sign up for a set number of months, and they have 2 choices in that. Once they finish that basic program, their agreement goes into a month-to-month agreement. If they ever decide that they want to cancel it, they give us 60 days notice after that point to cancel the agreement, and we let them walk away.
So that initial term was what?
Well, we have 2 choices. We have a 5-month program and a 9-month program. And those are the 2 choices that a person has. The 5 months a little more expensive than the 9 months. So a lot of people, really depends on what's more important to them, the commitment that they want to make, or do they want to save a little money and register for a little longer period. After that, whichever period is up, their tuition increases and goes to a higher level, which we call our auto renew. And at that point, that's the rate that they continue to pay, sort of like a black belt club membership, but their tuition rolls into that automatically. And in Maryland, where some places you're not allowed to have those future services agreements, and you have to renew them. Fortunately, here we don't have to do that. We can structure it where after a certain period it can renew automatically. So for me, everything that we do in our schools is about simplicity. And this, I always I like the term lowest common denominator. That if you have 12 schools, I'm not going to be at 12 schools. I'm not necessarily going to have the best or brightest person who is doing that enrollment. So the simpler I can make any policy that we have, the easier it is for that person to follow it. So what we did is we said, there's only one simple way to enroll the person after they, one of the things I found out years ago was I spent a lot of time. I had two piles. One pile was the people that I was trying to get to join, and the other pile was people that had joined, but I was trying to get to renew. Mm-hmm. And so what we did is we got rid of that pile of renewals, and I said, okay, the only thing I want my program director to do is focus on new business. So as long as he focuses or she focuses on getting new students, once they finish that initial enrollment agreement, it automatically renews, and they don't have to do anything. They don't have to fill out any new paperwork, and it just takes care of itself.
So it automatically renews on a month-to-month basis with a slight increase.
Right.
And they can cancel anytime they want with 60-day notice, written notice. Gotcha.
Yeah. And the key, which I took from one of my mentors who passed away, Nick Kokinos, many years ago, one of the things he said to me that just kind of stuck in my head was he said, initially you have to get the person in the habit of coming. So initially they really have to make a commitment. But once they've made that initial commitment, if they like your school, they like what you're doing, and they get into the training, they're going to continue, whether or not you have them locked in long term or whether you don't. So at that point, I realized, really it's only that initial term where I have to bind them to an agreement and make sure that they're willing to commit and come to class. Once they've gotten in the habit of class, now if I can just make sure they're learning, they're progressing, they're feeling good about their training, they're going to continue coming. So it's not at that point about locking them in long term as much as it is making sure that we provide the service that is going to keep them coming back.
Wow. Now, how do you then the next logical question for me is upgrades or black belt training or master's club, those types of things. Do you have those programs then at your school?
The only one that we have is black belt club, which again is not a financial upgrade for us. For us, it's just a write a letter on what earning your black belt would mean to you so that we can put it in their file. And in other words, we want them to mentally make that commitment to black belt. And then, of course, they can, wear a black belt club uniform and that type of thing so that every time they come to class, they're reminded of that commitment they made. But at the same time, it's not a financial commitment. They haven't signed another agreement saying that, that they will continue for the next 3 years at such and such rate. And honestly, and I say this, because I thought about this many, many times, and with conversations with you, I'll probably think about it again after we get off of this call. But if I was doing it myself, I think I probably would do upgrades and would do some other things. But I go back to that lowest common denominator,
right?
And that's one of the things about running so many locations is the training that it takes to get those people to perform at the level that you want. I believe if I was doing the upgrades myself, and I do have a few employees that I think could do those, but as we look at 12 locations, I don't have 12 superstar instructors
right.
that head instructors at the schools like you said. You got 2 or 3 that are fantastic. You got 3 or 4 or 5 that are in the middle, and then you've got some that are straggling along. And sometimes if you look at what the reason that they're straggling along, it's not a bad location. It's a bad leader or a bad, head instructor at that location that's just not performing at the level that you'd like to see.
So black belt training then is really, you use it more as a retention tool, a motivation tool, more than anything.
Correct.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes.
That's awesome. Now, speaking of staffing, you've used the word program director, and what's the typical John Bussard martial arts school? What's it take to staff these schools?
Initially, we would start out with 2 full-time people at the school, and one of them would have the role of, the simple analogy is always, one person's job is to fill the bucket, the other person's job is to, keep that bucket from leaking. So you're going to have one person whose primary goal is to teach and to run the floor and to make sure that all the students are happy and service the students. The other person's job primarily is to try to fill the school. To market the school, to get new students involved, enrolled, etc., to work on marketing within the school and make sure that they're doing things to keep those numbers coming in. Those are the 2 primary positions. As the school grows, we're adding additional part-time people. Once they hit a level of 250 or so students, they may end up getting an additional full-time staff member at that location.
Gotcha.
But staffing starts small and it grows depending on how well, or as the school grows.
Now, with 12 locations, is each one of your program directors in charge of marketing their own location? Or 12 locations, I'm thinking you probably have a telemarketer person to set a bunch of appointments for all the locations, maybe even a marketing director that's out there doing marketing for all the locations. Or how do you handle? Is it staff responsible, or are you getting extra staff for some of this stuff?
Well, it's both. We have a corporate office that does a lot of generic marketing. We're on the radio. We're still in flyers. We're doing Facebook advertising and all of those things. But in addition to that, every school is surrounded by elementary schools and by private schools and daycare centers and things like that. So the individual program directors at those locations, they're going to be tasked with, having a booth at the local fall festival or, spring fair and things like that. So they're going to be involved in setting those things up and doing any events that are centrally located to that school. In addition to that, we have a person in our corporate office who also works and sort of tracks those things. So if we know an event is an annual event, we'll take care of that on a corporate level to make sure that we're registered for it and that we, just have to tell the people at the school, hey, you have an event here, make sure you're there. But we do want the staff at the school, the program director in particular, to work with the PTAs and whatever local events might be taking place. We want them to be a part of that.
Okay, awesome. And speaking of marketing, does each of your schools have like a new student goal for the month?
Yes. Our goal, again, we try to keep it as simple as possible. So, back when I was running a school, my goal was very simple. It was 1 a day. I wanted to enroll 1 person a day. And again, I want to try to keep to what you said, what's our middle school?
Average, yeah.
Yeah, the average school. So the average school, I would say, the goal is probably between 15 and 20 new students a month, probably more on the 15 side than the 20. The larger schools that we have are, a little better at enrollments. And I think the smaller schools, again, or the schools that aren't growing as well as they should, they're probably a little less than that. But I would say 15 to 16, somewhere, maybe 4 a week would be a typical goal. But the other thing that varies is it really depends on where the school is in terms of its maturity level. So a newer school, we want that number a lot higher. Once the school matures and they've been around for 5 or 6 years and they've got students all the way from white to black belt, then it's about adding to the school, but at the same time, you're really focused more on retention than we are in growing it. So there's sort of that initial push that you have to have, and when a school's new, whether it's sort of that average school or if it's a great school, you're always still going to want to have that initial push where you're doing better than you would be if it was a mature school.
Now, what would be the average price per student value at one of your schools? Do you calculate it that way or think about it that way?
Yeah, we do. Well, really, it comes down to 2 things for us. Well, and I guess you could say a third, but we're not. The one thing that we're not great at is equipment sales. Never have been. We sell sparring equipment, T-shirts, new uniforms and that type of thing. But really, we don't. Our supply sales are probably about 1.5%. So they're very, very low from an industry standpoint. But the two things that really factor into our tuition and our student value is exam fees and tuition. So on average, if you put those things together, the average student value is about $200 per month per student.
Wow. I think 174, 175 is what I hear, but that's great. $200 per student. That's awesome. All right, let's talk a little bit since we're on marketing, let's talk a little bit about marketing. Best marketing action. Your guys, with all your schools combined, what's the number one? I look at lead generation. I either look at lead generation, how am I gathering leads, or mass intros. What's your guys' best marketing? One action, best marketing.
Best marketing for us is all internal. It's all referral. The one thing that we do, I think, as well as anyone in the industry, is we constantly have referral programs set up, and they're always new. We don't have a generic system in place where, if you refer a new student, we'll give you a T-shirt, because that just gets old and it's boring. So what we've tried to do is we try to make our enrollment contest fun and exciting, and we always want it to be something new, whether it was, a spin and win referral contest where if you referred a friend, you got to spin and win. We've done everything from spin and win to Plinko. We've done, the thing where you spin the cage around and have to draw out a ticket and you win whatever's on the ticket, lollipop trees, you name it. We've done it all. And all of these things are just designed to, because, again, we teach primarily children. So we want to get the kids excited. So if we go in and say, hey, we're having this great contest, if you bring a friend with you, and of course, what goes hand in hand with that is the buddy days and those type of events that we set up at the school that give them the opportunity to bring their friends. So number one, above and beyond anything else, over 50% of all of our new students come from referral.
Okay, awesome, great. Give me the other two. Meaning there's probably three top go-to, but give me the other two.
The other two, Facebook marketing, of course, is big for us. We're getting a lot of feedback and new students. We've redesigned our website within the last year and a half. And so we're getting much better results from the Facebook ads we're running. I would say the other thing that we're doing is, just grassroots demos. The same thing everybody else is doing in terms of, the booths and how we run the booths and the spring fairs and the silent auctions and, anything and everything that we can get into within the school systems and get our name out there. If they're having talent shows at the schools and somebody wants to go and break a board, we're trying to get in and do classroom talks, all of those things to build up our name within the local cities that we're in and just trying to get as many people through the doors we can.
So your top three is referrals, Facebook, and everything else, right? So
yes.
All the other stuff. and birthday parties. You guys are doing birthday parties.
Yes, we're doing birthday parties as well.
Okay, awesome. All right, so real quick, and we'll wrap this up. I know you're a busy man. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Biggest industry challenge that you have either had in the past or that you have now?
I think the biggest challenge that we face in order to grow is staffing. It's really that simple. If I had the staff to have 100 schools, I'd have 100 schools. We've developed the systems, and we've tried to make the systems as simple as possible. We've had to overcome some barriers. It's a lot different in 2017 with people like you out there that have had the success that you've had. It's like Roger Bannister, right? Roger Bannister, when he ran the 4-minute mile. Mm-hmm. Before he had done it, no one before that had ever done it. And after he finally broke that 4-minute mile barrier, within the next year, several other people did it. So before he did it, they thought it was impossible. Well, now what we're seeing is we're seeing people who have, built 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 locations. So when I first started, the typical response, and even when I was first hiring employees, was, come on, you don't want to do that. You need to get a real job.
Right.
And we've sort of made it into a legitimate occupation with the growth that we've had in running our schools professionally. But there's still that stigma that's out there when you're trying to get people to, come and work for you.
Are you getting most of your instructors from your organization, or are you hiring from outside, or both?
I'm trying to do as much as I can from within the organization. I don't really like the hired gun mentality, because what I found is, in essence, what you're doing is you're trying to hire somebody to come in, to teach what you want as part of your system. But what inevitably happens is they're looking for a building, a roof over their head to teach what they already know.
Yeah.
And I've tried it in the past, and I've had some issues with it. I've had some successes. Tim Rook worked for me. Now he's, part of your organization. He's doing fantastic. He's taken it, and he's done very well. But we, and Tim was a fantastic guy when he came to work for us, and he came from another, from outside. He wasn't a black belt from us, but he came from outside. So we have had some success with that, but we've also had, some guys that, make you want to bang your head into the wall, because, they're sort of, they've already been shaped, and they've gone through the kiln, and now they're hard as a rock, and they don't want to change. So we've really tried to build from within. And those people, they're all in from the beginning. They're not trying to change what you're doing, or trying to, undermine what you're doing either. They're trying to, they believe in what you've done, because, the great thing for me, and one of the things that I really want to try to incorporate into our marketing going into the future, is I've got a lot of guys and girls that work for us that started with me when they were 7 years old, 8 years old, and I've been in the business long enough now where, some of them are doctors, some of them are accountants, and some of them are working for our organization. So I can kind of have, a picture of one of my instructors who's 28 years old now, and also a picture of him when he was 8 years old. And, so nothing speaks about your results more than that. And so that's one of the marketing campaigns that we're actually working on for the future.
Gotcha. 2 more questions.
Okay.
What was the tipping point? Meaning, John Bussard had 1 school, and he had 2 schools, and he's got, okay, now it's 3, and I've got 4, time goes by. What was the tipping point? What do you think was the main thing that happened that you're like, man, as soon as I find staff, I can just crank these out now? Was there a defining moment? Was there a defining breakthrough? Was there a tipping point?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if there was a specific one. Because we've sort of grown all through the existence. Sometimes we grew by opening a new school, but other times we grew because we had a spot that was 1,500 square feet, and the space next to it was vacant, and we said, okay, we'll take it, and we went to 3,000. But I think there wasn't so much a tipping point in terms of when I knew I could stamp them out, because we had to wait for staff to sort of develop to do that. But there have been several points where I've had to pull back on the reins a little bit and put the brakes on and say, okay, because the systems that we had in place when we had 1 or 2 locations, all of a sudden when we got to 4, they didn't work anymore. And we had to stop and say, okay, this, the way we're doing this isn't working. Maybe it was inventory, or maybe it was, just reporting their sales, or whatever it was. There were several places along the way, and in fact, at 12 locations, we're at that point again. Okay. Where, in fact, I went to Harvard Business School to sort of try to learn more about that. One of the reasons was because I sort of questioned whether or not I could take the business to the next level. Did I have the managerial skill and the leadership skill to do that? So we've been for probably about the last 2 or 3 years in this point where, I thought about opening more locations, But at the same time, I've had to kind of put myself in check and say, we still have a few more things that we need to figure out internally so that we have the systems in place so that when we go to 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, we can do it without a lot of stress because we'll have everything in place the way it needs to be. And before, I could go and open it now, but all it's going to do is cause me a headache.
Right.
And so there have been a few points in time, I think at 3 schools and maybe at 6 or 7 schools where we've had to sit down and readjust. And right now at 12 schools, we're having to do it again.
Right. Wow. But that's what's made you successful. And I'm sure if there's anybody in the industry that's going to figure it out to take it from 12 to 30, it's going to be you. One more final question. Best piece of advice you have for school owners out there?
Well, I think that the most important thing is to figure out what they want to do. They don't have to be me. They don't have to be you. You and I are both successful, but we're doing it in different ways.
Exactly.
And that's the key is to figure out what is it that you want to do. There are plenty of people that just, maybe they just want one school. They want to be there. They want to teach. Do you want multi schools? Do you want to be a consultant? What is it exactly that you want to do, and figure out the plan for doing that. For example, for me, one of the things that I'm looking at now, when I was first coming up and opening different locations, I was not very picky in terms of, if I knew what type of shopping center I wanted to be in, but if the space was 1,500 square feet, I'd say, okay, I'll take that. If the space was 2,300 square feet, okay, I'll take, and I would take the space and figure out how to make it work for me.
Right.
One of the things looking back on it now is, or what I want to do into the future is I want to have a very distinct model of, what it is exactly as you were discussing earlier, having, here's the size that we want. Here's how much staff it takes to make it successful. Here's the type of location that we want it to be in. All of those things so that, at that point you can really stamp it out. I don't know if you saw the movie The Founder.
It was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So looking at that, how they, chalked it all out in the parking lot, that was great. But just figuring out those kind of things. And if you want to have multi locations, then, that's the type of thing. Figure it out now while you're, at 1 or 2 locations. And, for me, like I said, one of the reasons I've had to stop at 3 or 6 or 12 and sort of, recalculate and recalibrate is because we didn't have it, so it was designed and stamped out into exactly what we wanted.
Well, and it changes, you're not the same. Your schools aren't the same when you had 5 locations is now 12. So things change and things evolve and you got to evolve and change with it,
Right.
Man, this was awesome. Any last words for our school owners that's listening? That's enough.
If they're going to the Super Show next month, I'll see them there. They can stop in and say hello. I'll be walking around and checking out things in Las Vegas. But no, that's it.
All right,
everything else is great.
I've taken 3 pages of notes here, setting here. So hopefully our listeners did the same. Or go back and rewind it, and some valuable information. John, thank you so much for doing this for me. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in Las Vegas in a few weeks.
All right, Barry, thanks. Take care.
Thank you.